The world as we know it has just been fractured by a billion-dollar deal, signed not in the lavish boardrooms of Wall Street or Paris, but in the shadows of an alliance no one saw coming. This is not a business report. This is a silent declaration of war, a slap in the face to the old world order built on oil and power. A young captain, Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, a nation many couldn't even point to on a map, has dared to refuse the Western giants. And he didn't just walk away, he walked away with a weapon that could reshape the entire African continent. This deal, a closely guarded secret, is giving analysts at the Pentagon and the Élysée Palace sleepless nights. They aren't afraid of a war, they are afraid of an idea: freedom. If you have ever felt small in the face of a giant, but still felt that fire of resistance burning in your heart, hit that like button as a sign that you are here, and join me as we pull back this curtain of secrecy. That political earthquake did not begin with a coup or a massive protest. It began with a discovery, a seemingly unrelated finding thousands of miles away. So, what gave a small, landlocked African nation the courage to do the unthinkable? The answer lies over 4,000 miles away, in an arid region of Pakistan's Sindh province. The National Oil and Gas Development Company suddenly announced they had found a new deposit of crude oil. Every day, nearly 275 barrels could be pumped from the earth. In the global market, this is a drop in the ocean, a tiny number compared to the colossal oil fields of Saudi Arabia. Most analysts ignored it. But for one man, a young captain in West Africa, this news was more than just numbers. It was a signal, a sliver of an opportunity. The first drop of oil that flowed on Pakistani soil would become the spark that would ignite the chains of a nation on the other side of the globe. To understand this earthquake, we must understand the man behind it, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He is not a politician in an expensive suit, educated in the prestigious universities of the West. He is a soldier, a man with the dust of the Sahel still on his boots, who has seen the desperation in his people's eyes firsthand. At 34, he became the youngest leader in the world, not because of ambition for power, but because the weight of history was placed on his shoulders. He saw a naked truth that his predecessors had deliberately ignored. Burkina Faso, whose name means land of the upright people, was living in the most brutal of paradoxes, the resource curse. Beneath their feet lie the fifth largest gold deposits in Africa. Gold, the metal that built empires and decorated crowns, was being pulled from their land every single day. Tons of shimmering gold were loaded onto private jets, flying straight to vaults in Switzerland and London, leaving behind giant pits and a nation drowning in poverty. Multinational corporations, mostly from France, built high fences around the mines, creating islands of wealth in a sea of misery. They spoke of development and jobs, but the local people received only meager wages, polluted water, and an uncertain future. Traoré saw children without schools because the country had no money, while billions of dollars in gold were flown out right over their heads. He saw farmers struggling on arid land, while foreign companies were given rights to precious water sources. To him, this wasn't economics. This was a humiliation. A new form of colonialism, more sophisticated, more ruthless, disguised in terms like free market and foreign investment. He knew that as long as his country depended on imported energy, as long as they had to beg for aid from the very people robbing them of their wealth, the word freedom would forever be a bitter joke. And then, the news from Pakistan reached him. Amidst hundreds of intelligence reports and chaotic news, that tiny piece of information about 275 barrels a day flashed like a beacon. Most people would have dismissed it, but Traoré did not. He didn't see 275 barrels of oil. He saw an escape route, a narrow path to slip past the giants who controlled every door, a chance to deal with a nation that had also been a victim of power games, a nation that understood oppression. The drama escalated when Western energy corporations, sensing a shift in the wind, rushed to Ouagadougou. They walked into the meeting room with smug smiles and thick briefcases. They made the usual offers: preferential loans to build power plants, long-term fuel supply contracts, promises of strategic partnerships. But they all came with an invisible price: dependency. They wanted to sell Burkina Faso energy, but they would hold the switch. They wanted to build infrastructure, but they would keep the blueprints. Traoré sat there, listening in silence. He looked at their confident faces, heard their polished words, and in his mind, he could only see the images of starving children next to a gold mine. He saw the perfectly gilded trap. When they finished, the room fell silent, waiting. And then, he spoke a single word, clear and firm. Number. The silence shattered. The executives were stunned. They had never heard that word. Not from a poor country that needed them. They stammered. They asked again, thinking they had misheard. Traoré calmly repeated himself, his gaze unwavering. He didn't need to explain. His headshake was more powerful than 1,000 speeches. It meant, the game is over. We will not sell our souls for the warmth of your hearth any longer. In that moment, he made a choice. And I want to ask you, wherever you're watching this, at 6 in the morning or 10 at night, have you ever faced a crossroads where one path was safety in chains and the other was perilous freedom? Share your choice in a comment below. The door slammed shut behind the uninvited guests, leaving Ibrahim Traoré alone with the future of his nation. He had rejected the old road. Now, he had to build a new one himself. The door was closed. But in that quiet room, Ibrahim Traoré didn't see an end. He saw a beginning. The West had been refused, and now it was time to act. A series of secret, military-grade encrypted communications began between Ouagadougou and Islamabad. There were no press releases, no grand state visits. Instead, there were small delegations, traveling quietly on commercial flights, blending into the crowd to avoid the watchful eyes of Western intelligence agencies. This was a geopolitical chess match played in the shadows, where every move could be a trap. Why Pakistan? Why would an African nation turn to a South Asian partner? Because Traoré understood that to escape one wolf, you don't run to another. He needed a partner, not a new master. Pakistan, a nuclear nation with a complex history with the West, understood better than anyone the price of sovereignty and the pressure from superpowers. They had been in Burkina Faso's position. They understood the desire for respect, to be treated as an equal. This was not an alliance of the weak, but a pact of the underestimated, who decided it was time to write their own rules. And that secret contract, when revealed, shook the foundations of the global economic order. The first clause was simple, yet revolutionary. Burkina Faso would buy crude oil directly from Pakistan. This action completely cut out the Western middlemen, the commodity trading giants like Glencore or Vitol, who had made billions in profits by buying cheap and selling dear to African nations for decades. With a stroke of a pen, Traoré removed these power brokers from the equation. But that was just the first shot. The real jewel of the contract, the weapon that would change Burkina Faso's destiny forever, was another clause. Pakistan would provide experts and technology to help Burkina Faso build its first modern oil refinery on its own soil. Stop for a moment and think about this. For more than 60 years of independence, Burkina Faso, a country with gold and land, could not produce a single liter of gasoline. They had to export raw resources at cheap prices, only to import the very products made from those resources at exorbitant costs. It was a vicious cycle of dependency, an economic humiliation. Traoré's dream was to break that cycle. He envisioned a massive industrial complex rising from the arid land. Towering distillation columns reaching for the sky, steel pipes glinting in the African sun. This would be the nation's industrial heart, where crude oil from Pakistan would be transformed into gasoline for motorcycles, diesel for farmers' tractors, and fuel for power plants. This wasn't just building a factory, this was planting a dream. If you've ever had an idea, an aspiration that others called crazy, but you were determined to build it from scratch, share your story in a single word in the comments. Show the world the power of daring to dream. Traoré's vision went even further. The refinery was just the hub. Surrounding it would be satellite industrial zones. Factories producing plastics, fertilizers, and pharmaceuticals would spring up, using the byproducts of the refining process. Hundreds of thousands of jobs would be created, not dangerous digging in a mine, but high-tech jobs for engineers and skilled workers. The economy would no longer depend on selling raw gold. For the first time in its history, Burkina Faso would become an industrial nation, a country that exports value-added products. He declared forcefully, a message not just to his people but to the world. If the West can exploit our wealth and sell it back to us, then we can use the resources of our own land to serve the progress of our own people. This was no longer a trade deal. This was an economic revolution, a definitive break with a subservient past. Burkina Faso would no longer be a mine for others to exploit. They would be the blacksmiths, forging their own future with their own hands. An industrial heart had begun to form, the refinery blueprints were laid out. But Ibrahim Traoré is not a naive dreamer. He is a soldier, and above all, he is a student of history. He knows that empires never give up power gracefully. African history is littered with the ghosts of visionary leaders who dared to dream of a self-reliant future, only to be toppled by foreign-backed coups or assassinated under mysterious circumstances. Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's own national hero, is a tragic example. Traoré knew that his refusal of the Western corporations didn't just cost them a contract. It challenged the entire power structure that had existed for centuries. And the response would not be an open war. It would be a war in the shadows. They wouldn't send armies, at least not at first. Instead, they would use pawns. They would pour money and weapons into the terrorist groups plaguing the Sahel, turning them into tools to create instability, to prove that Traoré's government was too weak to protect its people. They would seek out disgruntled military officers and greedy politicians, turning them into traitors, ready to stab the revolution in the back for a few dollars. An economic revolution unprotected by steel is just a sandcastle, beautiful but destined to crumble at the first wave. The dream of the refinery, of industrial zones, of a prosperous Burkina Faso, would all be meaningless if the country was torn apart by violence and chaos. Traoré needed a shield strong enough to make any enemy, internal or external, think twice before acting. And that's when the second secret clause of the Pakistan-Burkina Faso Treaty was activated, a clause even more shocking than the oil deal. The purchase of Al-Khalid main battle tanks. These are not old, refurbished Soviet-era tanks. The Al-Khalid is the pride of Pakistan's defense industry. A steel beast, ranked among the most modern tanks in the world. Picture this, a machine weighing nearly 50 tons, roaring across the desert at over 40 miles per hour, a mobile fortress that is nearly impenetrable. At its heart is a 125mm smoothbore cannon, capable of firing a variety of rounds, from armor-piercing shells to laser-guided anti-tank missiles. It is the arm of death, capable of turning an enemy tank into a pile of scrap metal from over 2 miles away. But firepower isn't everything. The Al-Khalid is equipped with a computerized fire control system, allowing it to lock onto and destroy moving targets with near-perfect accuracy, day or night. And its defense? A nightmare for any anti-tank weapon. The Al-Khalid is protected by layers of composite armor, and especially explosive, reactive armor. This armor is like the scales of a dragon. When an enemy missile or RPG hits, it detonates a small explosive charge outward, destroying the enemy warhead before it can penetrate the hull. It absorbs and neutralizes threats, keeping the crew inside safe. The arrival of the Al-Khalids on Burkinabe soil completely changed the balance of power in the region. It sent a clear, cold message to everyone. This land is no longer a soft target. The days when militant groups could roam freely, the days when neighboring countries could be instigated into aggression, were over. Any attack on Burkina Faso would now face a wall of steel. This strength was not for invasion, but for the protection of a dream. It was Traoré's answer to the forces that wished to extinguish hope. And you, when faced with threats in your own life, do you choose to be the prey or the protector? Let me know your choice with a comment. The shield on the ground was in place. The revolution had its steel guardians. But Traoré knew that in modern warfare, threats don't just come from the ground. They also come from the sky. The steel shield was raised on the ground, but Ibrahim Traoré knew the 21st century battlefield isn't decided by tank duels alone. The enemy of Burkina Faso is not a uniformed army, lined up on an open field. Their enemies are phantoms. Jihadists who weave through the vast deserts, terrorists who blend into villages, foreign spies and agents operating in the shadows. They are like water, flowing through the cracks of a border that stretches for thousands of miles, a border nearly impossible to control with manpower alone. An Al-Khalid tank can level a base, but it can't track a suicide bomber mingling in a crowded market. This war is a war of information. Whoever sees first, wins. Traoré needed an asymmetric advantage. He needed eyes everywhere, a tireless surveillance system that could watch every square meter of his vast territory, from the remote dunes of the Sahel to the dense forests in the south. He needed something that could hang in the sky, silent as a ghost, watching without being seen. And once again, the answer came from Pakistan. The third clause of the deal of the century was revealed. A fleet of modern unmanned aerial vehicles, or drones. First, the Sharp-R2, the surveillance drone. These are not the toy drones you see in the park. The Sharp-R2 is a high-tech bird of prey, with a wingspan of nearly 30 feet, capable of flying for hours on end at an altitude of over 17,000 feet, completely invisible and inaudible from the ground. Equipped with the most advanced electro-optical and infrared cameras, it is the eye that never sleeps for the Burkinabe army. In the dead of night, its infrared camera can detect the body heat of a person hiding in the bushes from miles away. During the day, its optical camera can zoom in to read the license plate of a suspicious truck moving down a remote dirt road. Before, the army had to send out foot patrols, facing the risk of ambush. Now, they can sit in a secure command center, hundreds of miles away, and watch the entire battlefield in real time. They can track weapons, smuggling routes, identify insurgent training camps, and predict attacks before they happen. Surprise, the enemy's greatest weapon, was neutralized. But seeing is not enough. After the eyes have found the prey, you need sharp talons to strike. This is where the Barak, the combat drone, comes in. If the Sharp-R2 is the eye, the Barak is the sword. Developed from Pakistan's real-world experience in its own war on terror, the Barak is a precision killer. It is armed with Bark laser-guided missiles. When a Sharp-R2 identifies a high-value target, a terrorist leader, a weapons cache, an enemy command post, it paints the target with an invisible laser beam. From high above, a Barak launches its missile, and that missile follows the laser with absolute precision, striking the target with a margin of error of just a few inches. These are not carpet bombing campaigns that cause civilian casualties. These are surgical strikes, removing a cancerous tumor without harming the healthy body. It's a way of delivering justice from the sky, quickly, efficiently, and with minimal risk. The combination of the Sharp-R2 and the Barak created a completely new operational environment. The skies of Burkina Faso had become an invisible net. For the terrorists and those who wish to create instability, there is nowhere left to hide. Every conversation, every movement, every gathering could be watched. At any moment, from a clear blue sky, death could arrive. Fear and paranoia began to spread through their ranks. They couldn't trust each other, couldn't gather in groups. The psychological war had begun before the first shot was even fired. The sky had become an invisible net. The enemy had no place to hide. This is a war of information and psychology. Have you ever felt an invisible eye watching you? And how did that feeling change your actions? Share that experience in the comments. It shows the power of knowing you are being observed. The ground was secured by tanks. The sky was controlled by drones. But Traoré knew that to complete his vision, he needed something more than weapons. He needed a brain. Tanks control the ground, drones command the sky. But Ibrahim Traoré knew that individual weapons, no matter how modern, are just body parts without a brain. For an army to be truly effective, it needs a central nervous system. A command center that can synthesize information from hundreds of different sources, from the eyes of a Sharp-R2 drone hovering at 17,000 feet, from the report of a soldier on patrol, from satellite intelligence data, and turn it all into a single, coherent, real-time picture of the battlefield. And this was the final piece, the most audacious clause in the treaty with Pakistan. The construction of a drone command and control center right in the capital, Ouagadougou. This is not just a building with a lot of screens. It is the brain of the national defense system. With the help of Pakistani engineers, Burkina Faso would possess a command center that could coordinate its entire drone fleet, direct Al-Khalid tank units to where they were needed most, and make strategic decisions in a split second. But Traoré's vision extended beyond his own borders. He didn't want to just create a safe oasis for Burkina Faso in the middle of a burning Sahel. He wanted to put out the fire. This command center was designed with the capacity to expand, to become a security shield for the entire region. He invited his neighbors, Mali and Niger, nations also facing similar threats and who had also cut military ties with France, to join the initiative. He envisioned a shared surveillance network where the three nations could share real-time drone intelligence, jointly tracking and eliminating terrorist groups that operate across their borders. This was a fatal blow to the old order. For years, France had maintained its military presence in the Sahel under the guise of counter-terrorism, but the results were murky at best. Now, Traoré was building a homegrown defense alliance by Africans, for Africans that was more effective and free of colonial strings. He was proving that Africa could solve its own problems without the need for Western protectors. And that's when the silence in Paris and Washington shattered, replaced by panic and rage. In Paris, at the Élysée Palace, it was an undisguisable humiliation. France, the former colonial power, was being kicked out of its historical backyard, not by a rival superpower like the US or China, but by the very former colonies it had always looked down upon. Their economic influence was severed by the oil deal. Their military might was rendered obsolete by the new defense alliance. Their legacy was evaporating into thin air. In Washington, the concern was more strategic. The Pentagon saw a new, independent power bloc forming in one of the world's most volatile regions. This bloc did not follow the West's orbit. It had Pakistani military technology, the potential for energy independence, and most importantly, it had an iron political will. The African chessboard they had carefully arranged for decades was being flipped over by a 34-year-old captain. And so, the counterattack began, not with missiles, but with more subtle means. First, the media war. Major Western news agencies simultaneously began publishing articles portraying Ibrahim Traoré as a brutal military dictator, a puppet in the hands of Pakistan, a threat to democracy. They ignored his reforms, ignored the support of his people, and focused only on images of soldiers and weapons to paint a picture of a belligerent regime. Next, the economic war. Delegations from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank began issuing warnings. Loans were delayed. Humanitarian aid was cut. Economic sanctions were implicitly threatened. They wanted to strangle Burkina Faso's young economy, to make the people angry with Traoré's government, to create chaos from within. And finally, the war in the shadows. CIA and DGSE agents on the ground were ordered to ramp up their activities, seeking to sabotage the construction of the refinery, to bribe officials, and to incite opposition groups. They attacked him with everything they had, not with bombs, but with lies and economic figures. They wanted to suffocate the revolution in silence. Have you ever been slandered, attacked by vicious rumors, just because you dared to walk a different path? If so, leave a comment with the number 1 to affirm that the truth will ultimately prevail. Traoré was now fighting not just terrorists, he was fighting an empire. The world was watching, holding its breath. The invisible siege of the West was tightening. On international television channels, Ibrahim Traoré was depicted as an outlaw. Economists in New York and London predicted the inevitable collapse of Burkina Faso. The pressure was immense. Any normal leader would have buckled, would have sought negotiations, would have accepted a few compromises to save himself. But Traoré is not a normal leader. He did not panic. He did not back down. Instead, he did something no one expected. He turned their own attack into his most powerful weapon. He understood that in the 21st century, empires are maintained not just by armies, but by the stories they tell. And he decided he would tell a different story. He didn't have CNN or the BBC, but he had something more powerful, the trust of his people and the naked truth. He walked out of the presidential office, took off the suit, and put on his familiar military uniform. He didn't hold flashy press conferences. He went to the villages, sat down with the farmers, spoke with the students. He used local radio and social media platforms to speak directly to his people and to the world. His message was simple and sharp. They attack us because for the first time in history, we are using our gold, our land, for ourselves. They call me a dictator because I refuse to be their puppet. They say our economy will collapse. But where was their silence for the last 60 years when their corruption and exploitation pushed this country to the brink? Look around you. Trust your own eyes, not their lies. And something miraculous happened. The pressure from the West didn't isolate Traoré. On the contrary, it turned him into a torch, illuminating a long-forgotten dream. The dream of Pan-Africanism. The leaders of Mali and Niger, who were under similar pressure, saw in Traoré an indispensable ally. The three nations together formed the Alliance of Sahel States. This wasn't just a military pact on paper. It was the embryo of a new federation. They began to openly discuss abandoning the CFA franc, the French-controlled currency, a symbol of neo-colonialism, and creating their own common currency. They planned joint infrastructure projects, connecting the three nations by rail and highways. Traoré's actions had gone viral. Across Africa, from the slums of Lagos to the universities of Nairobi, young people began to follow his every speech. His image, a young, uncompromising leader in military fatigues, speaking of sovereignty and dignity, spread like wildfire on TikTok, X, and Facebook. He became the symbol for a new generation, a generation tired of corruption, tired of foreign interference, and yearning for a future decided by Africans themselves. He was the embodiment of Patrice Lumumba, of Thomas Sankara, but this time, perhaps, with a chance to win. A new war was being waged, not on the battlefield, but in the minds of millions. On one side, giant media corporations. On the other, a young captain with the truth. You, as an observer, which story do you choose to believe? Comment R, if you believe in the old order. Comment B, if you believe in a new dawn for Africa. Your choice shows which narrative is truly winning. The West's plan had backfired spectacularly. The more they vilified him, the more popular he became. The more they punished his country, the higher the national spirit soared. French ambassadors were expelled one by one from Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey. French military bases, once symbols of power, were closed in humiliation. The French tricolour was lowered, and in its place, the flags of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger were raised together, flying as a declaration of a new era. They had tried to make him a pariah, but instead, they made him a hero to an entire continent. Their greatest weapon, the ability to control the narrative, had failed for the first time. The flags of the Alliance of Sahel States fly high, a symbol of defiance against the old order. On the streets of Ouagadougou, you can feel an unprecedented sense of pride. It seems that Goliath has stepped back, and David has won. But in the corridors of power in Washington and Paris, the initial humiliation has given way to a colder, more ruthless determination. Plan A, smear campaigns and economic strangulation had failed. Now it was time for Plan B, a quieter, more dangerous plan. The war is not over. It has just moved into a phase where there are no rules and no witnesses. And at the center of this storm is one man, Ibrahim Traoré. He has won the hearts of millions, but he has also made himself the #1 target in the world. The price of being a symbol is absolute loneliness. He is the most heavily guarded man, and also the greatest prisoner in Burkina Faso. Every meal must be tested by a taster. Every meeting is scrutinized. Childhood friends, comrades in arms, which of them could have been bought? Paranoia is a weapon, and his enemies wield it expertly. On his shoulders rests more than his own safety. He carries the burden of hope. Millions across the continent look to him as a savior. What happens if he fails? What happens if he makes a mistake? That pressure is heavier than any assassination threat. He's not just fighting for Burkina Faso. He's fighting for a dream. And he knows that if he falls, that dream could die with him for generations, and the entire nation is paying the price. The road to freedom is not paved with roses. It is paved with harsh trials. The unofficial sanctions are still in effect. Goods are more expensive. The economy is straining while it waits for the refinery, their greatest hope, to be completed. Will they have the strength to endure? Or will fatigue and poverty turn them against their own revolution? The threat of a civil war, fanned by foreign money and weapons, still hangs like a dark cloud. The Al-Khalid tanks and Barak drones were bought to fight external enemies, but the most horrific scenario is having to use them against fellow Burkinabe who have been deceived and incited. It's a prospect Traoré never wants to face. This is the price of freedom. Freedom is not a state of comfort and safety. True freedom is the right to choose your own path, no matter how rugged and dangerous it may be. It is the right to make your own mistakes and learn from them, rather than living a life arranged for you, but in chains. Burkina Faso, under Traoré's leadership, has chosen that difficult path. They are paying for freedom with sweat, instability, and perhaps even blood. It's a terrible price. But I ask you, is there an ideal, a belief in your life that you would be willing to sacrifice to protect? Share it, if you dare, in the comments. Your answer shows what is truly valuable. The future of Burkina Faso and all of West Africa is being decided day by day, hour by hour. The first bricks of the oil refinery are being laid, a tangible symbol of hope and rebirth. But in the shadows, in faraway places, the bricks of a new plot are also being laid. Their enemies have learned from their failure. They will not underestimate Traoré again. The next attack will not be mere threats. It will be a fatal blow, aimed directly at the heart of the revolution. The world holds its breath, waiting to see if the dawn will break, or if the night will fall forever. From a forgotten nation, mired in poverty and exploitation, Burkina Faso has risen to become the epicenter of a geopolitical revolution. From a dependent people, they have become a symbol of defiance. It all started with the decision of one man, a decision that created a wave that spread across a continent, awakening a sleeping dream. The future is not yet written. The battle between the old order and the new dawn continues every day, in economic deals, in media campaigns, and in the dark corners of the intelligence war. The final outcome remains unknown. But this story is not just about Ibrahim Traoré or Burkina Faso. It is about something much larger, the courage to choose one's own path, despite the pressure and the danger. It is proof that history is not a predetermined fate, but the sum of the choices of brave people. It is a reminder that a nation, no matter how small, can change the rules of the game. The story of Ibrahim Traoré and Burkina Faso is still being written. This isn't just a video, this is a message that courage is contagious, and a single spark can set an empire ablaze. If you believe in the right to determine your own destiny, if you believe that stories like this need to be heard, then hit subscribe and join us. Because this isn't my channel, this is our forum, where together we continue to write the stories of courage.